Welcome to SMU Stories, the podcast where we dive into the journeys of remarkable alumni from Southern Methodist University who have excelled in the world of business. I'm your host, Mitch Brown, and each episode will uncover the secrets, challenges, and triumphs of this extraordinary individual. From entrepreneurs who've turned dreams into multi-million-dollar enterprises to executives leading global corporations, SMU has nurtured a community of innovators, leaders, and visionaries. Join us as we sit down with the alumni who have walked the same halls, studied in the same classrooms, and emerged as industry pioneers. Get ready for insights, inspiration, and actionable advice as we explore the unique SMU stories that have shaped the business landscape. Whether you're a current student, an aspiring entrepreneur, or simply curious about the power of the SMU network, this podcast is for you. So grab your headphones, settle in, and let's embark on a journey through the compelling narratives of SMU alumni who are making waves in the business world. This is SMU Stories. Let's begin. SMU Stories is brought to you by Security National Bank of Texas, SMU Cox School of Business, Morrison Seeger Venture Capital Partners, and Hilltop Property Tax. Melissa, thank you for joining us today. Very excited to tell your SMU story. If you would, like we do with every start of our episode, would you please introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure. Melissa Kalka, born and raised in Dallas, Texas. I went to Bishop Lynch High School in East Dallas, and then went to Texas A&M for undergrad and have a business degree from there. Went into banking for a couple of years before I ended up at SMU Law and graduated in 2012. And now a partner at Kirkland Ellis and its private equity and M&A group.
Awesome. A lot to unpack there. First, you are our first SMU Dedman Law interview, so I'm really excited to share that side of the house. I know that's a really proud school we have on campus and some incredible alumni base. So thank you for joining us there. But before you got to campus to get back to Dallas and decided a career in law, you went A&M. You left Dallas for a little bit. That's okay. But then you chose a route in banking. Tell us kind of where you were post undergrad and where you were thinking career wise that led you to pick a career in finance.
Sure. So I actually at A&M thought I was going to be a dentist, and I was a biomedical science and business dual degree. And my parents were much smarter than me at 17 going to college and said, you will get a business degree.
Yeah.
And fortunately, I had to shadow at a dental clinic for 60 hours before I could apply to dental school, and I hated it. So I got my business degree after doing my DAT and all of that stuff. And I really loved my finance classes. And so I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do at that point. And kind of banking fell into a natural career path.
Mm-hmm.
It was something that was interesting to be able to kind of learn a lot about a bunch of different companies. Numbers fascinated me. I went to work for American National Bank, which was or is a large independent bank that's based out of North Texas. And so I actually worked at a location on Oaklawn underwriting commercial real estate loans, like large commercial real estate loans. Like I remember one of my first ones was underwriting the development that's at the corner of Northwest Highway in Hillcrest. It used to be an Easy's, and they tore it down, and then Equinox and all of that went into there. So I really enjoyed it. But at the same time, it was one of those things that I was seeing the private equity firms kind of putting together these really interesting projects. Mm-hmm. I was like, that looks really interesting. And lawyers are the ones that are really advising and helping figure it out. And I was like, maybe this isn't the end of my journey. So I started exploring law school.
And then what was it that the kind of the lawyer side, the legal side, that kind of sparked that interest that knew kind of based on your personality was that kind of middle ground that was attached to both parties that you thought could be an interesting career for you?
It's one of those things that I think, especially as a transactional lawyer, for what I do, I am not just kind of pushing paper. I'm really an advisor. It's one of those things. I have conversations with the CEOs, with general counsels, with the CFOs, figuring out strategy, what's important. And it's not, going to court, there's winners and there's losers. It's going to buy a business. It's going to sell a business. It's going to raise equity. And so getting to know these professionals and kind of being able to, in a lot of ways, be an advisor more than anything. And for what you do on the, especially private equity, is kind of like the Wild West. There's not a structure that you can't throw in front of me that we can't figure out how to do. And so being able to be creative and figure out ways to make deals happen was just really interesting to me.
That's awesome. So even before going to law school, you kind of saw that vision out in front of you and kind of the playbook that might be a possibility. So fascinating. I'm glad you shared that. I think one of the main reasons we do this SMU Stories is to be able to break down how some of our notable alumni got to where they are, right? And so I think it's awesome to see that you went in a shift from wanting to be a dentist to potentially working in finance to then ultimately making the decision to go to law school. And I think that's so important that people know there are these options. You can change your mind. Like, it doesn't all come together right away, but once you find something that maybe really clicks, to pursue it. So we come to that realization. Was SMU Law kind of an easy choice, or what was the law school decision?
Yeah.
And for those who don't know, what is the process of kind of deciding to make that change a couple years into your career?
Sure. So it was my sister makes fun of me because she's like, "You're such a planner. You're so type A." And law school was really against that. It was one of those things I really started exploring it in the fall of 2007, and I started in the fall of 2008. I took the LSATs like later in the year. Because it was kind of one of those things I was like, it's now or never, because at some point I was afraid if I waited another year, would I have the guts to actually do it?
Right.
And it was one of those things. I didn't tell anybody at my office that I was taking the LSATs and that I was considering it. And, 2007, 2008 was an interesting year. It was kind of like the beginning of the end. It was right before the financial crisis, and I was underwriting commercial real estate. And so it was one of those things that I took the LSATs. I applied to a bunch of different schools. At the end of the day, I knew I wanted to be a transactional lawyer. And I got into schools. SMU, it was and still is a top 40 law school program. And it was one of those things that I had started doing my research and talking to friends that graduated before me and had already gone through. And SMU has a reputation as really kind of ahead of a lot of other schools in terms of its curriculum of training actually transactional lawyers. It has courses that actually are very helpful, that you're not kind of starting flat-footed. And so that was really a draw, along with the fact that it was here. And as I got closer to making a decision after I had my acceptances from law schools, I had acceptances, or I had admissions to higher ranked schools. But for me, it was one of those things. You cannot beat the SMU network and the city of Dallas. And the city of Dallas has a legal market that is the same as any other major market. For instance, GIP BlackRock was the largest asset manager deal that's ever been done. I co-led it out of Dallas, Texas. So the legal market itself here is phenomenal. And SMU kind of has like a first foot in compared to anybody else. So to me, the combination of those factors really drew me to SMU, and it was my top pick for all those reasons. And then you flash forward to when I got my letters of admission and all that, you could start seeing the writing on the wall that the market was about to turn. And it became very scary. And I remember calling my dad and I said, I've got these different options. SMU, interestingly enough, has this evening program. I am terrified I was like, I'm out of undergrad for 2 years. I have a mortgage. I'm engaged. I have life insurance. I'm a grown up. Like, what am I supposed to do? I have to pay for law school on my own. He was like, well, maybe you need to do SMU's evening program instead. If you're that worried about what's going to happen, he was like, if you put your mind to it, you can do it. And so I decided to do the evening program at SMU. And it's one of those things I did figure it out and I balanced a full-time banking job. I was very fortunate that like I don't think every employer would have done that, but when I made the decision, I went and talked to my boss at American and I was like, I really want to do this and I hope you'll be supportive of it. And she was like, absolutely. She was like, this is amazing. You need to go all in. Like SMU's down the street. So
Right.
I got to the office every day at 6:40 in the morning and I left at 5 o'clock and I drove down Hillcrest Avenue. So it made it easy.
That's incredible. Is a few things there. One, kind of understanding the positioning SMU had within the professional network and the career you were looking to get into and how important that is. I imagine that's only amplified now, right? And you've seen firsthand the amount of private equity firms and financial firms that have come to Dallas that have only made that even more prominent. And these Dallas students, the Devon students that I know you still talk to and interview, I mean, they're one, speak to how great of a position that is and the opportunity now for those interested in law to pick SMU.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing because you do have so many private equity firms here, and SMU has this really unique program that it's I'm blanking on the name of it, but it's basically a symposium type of classwork that for a semester they send students in-house. So they go to AT&T, they go to Cyrus One, they go to TPG, you name it. All these big companies around Dallas, they're having SMU law students come in 2 or 3 days a week. And then back in the classroom, they're learning about different business principles. It's a really cool program. Some of these programs our companies have hired SMU students, but for those that I've had personally that did it as coursework, by the time they came back to me after their summer program and came back to me as a full-time associate, they had a very different perspective of what was it like on the client side. And so being able to have that kind of touch point and being right in the middle of Dallas, I mean, businesses, firms, they're constantly there. The school is able to get really great speakers and happy hours and other things to kind of really connect the students with the community. And so to me, it's one of those things. It's, again, you're in the middle of a really booming city that has people like Goldman Sachs moving their headquarters here. You do have TPG in Fort Worth. You've got Lone Star Funds. You've got these big private equity shops. And then you've also got a lot of middle market that also drives the whole private equity sector. So it's only changed and like grown exponentially in terms of opportunities since I was there.
Yeah. And so you do the nighttime program, full-time working. I imagine that laid the groundwork for the work ethic that was to be required from one, the amount of work that comes into being successful in law school, but then ultimately building the career you have. What was that like? What were you learning on campus during those first couple of years, and did it only strengthen the decision you made? And then you had mentioned wanting to be transactional probably before you got to law school. Was there ever a time that maybe that you learned something else and maybe pursued another avenue, or was it always knew you wanted to be the transactional business side?
So I'll take the last question first. I always knew I wanted to be a transactional lawyer. It was one of those, I would say I was the exception and not the rule of going to law school. Although I was in the evening program, so most of my classmates, one of the guys I started my career with at my first law firm, he was an engineer at Bell Helicopter and they paid for him to go to law school. So he knew he was going to be an IP lawyer. We also had somebody that was a nurse that knew that she wanted to go into healthcare law. And one of my closest friends in law school worked in private equity. She knew she wanted to be a transactional lawyer. So I would say in the evening program, because you did have people with full-time careers that were making that decision to go at night, they might have had more of an idea. But otherwise, I think, especially I see it now interviewing, most people don't know what they want to do because they just don't know what a transactional lawyer is. What do they actually do? Because most law school programs are really geared, your first year is really geared towards litigation.
you had the fortunate experience to work in banking and kind of see what a transactional attorney does, to have that foresight, you said, but a lot of people don't even know the scope of work. I'll use this chance as now to, what would you say, what does a transactional attorney do, and kind of describe that role for us who maybe aren't as familiar with the day-to-day work.
Sure. So, like at a big law firm like Kirkland, it's one of those things. Transactional can mean a lot of things. So, for me, I do private equity and M&A. What that means is I represent private equity funds like Global Infrastructure Partners and KKR, and I go help them deploy equity that they've raised in their funds to go buy businesses. So, for instance, I represented KKR and GIP and going and buying Dallas-based public company CyrusOne and taking it private for $15 billion. And so it's now no longer publicly traded. It's now privately held by them. I also represent strategic companies like Ryan, again, a Dallas-based company. So it's privately held, and then buying companies and deploying and doing refinancings. And then you've also kind of got capital markets on the transactional side, which is securities work. So it's taking companies public, it's doing equity offerings and debt offerings on the public markets. You've got real estate and you've got fund formation. So going and raising capital. It's a whole different, there's so many different things that make it up, but think about it as anything not going to court and really kind of working with businesses to deploy their strategies.
So with such a wide scope of things that you can be brought into from the legal side in the facilitation of really all M&A deal flow, how do you then wrap your head around that, building that skill set, right? Because one day you're doing a public take private, one day you're in the capital markets. Like, how do you compartmentalize all those roles that you do to become, again, proficient to where these companies can trust you?
So it's one of those things that I started, and Kirkland does the same thing, where your first 2 years as a lawyer, you kind of try it out. You try some capital markets, you try some debt finance, you try some M&A and private equity, and then you start specializing. So my practice is largely focused on representing sponsors and private equity sponsors. And then a smaller portion of it is doing kind of public company M&A, strategic M&A. So I've done enough of it, especially those firms like Kirkland, you do things like that, so that as a partner, I know enough to advise the client, and I know when to pick up the phone and call a capital markets partner and say, hey, I've got this issue, I need your help.
And so we'd be doing a disservice if we just said, Melissa now is just, throwing $15 billion deals together. There was a much bigger journey to get there, right? So going back, what is the process for, you're in school, how do you go about finding that first career, picking the right firm, and then tell us a little bit more of that arc that got you from law school into now your role with Kirkland and Ellis.
Sure. So what's interesting is law firm recruitment is very different from anything else besides maybe accounting. So it's one of those that I am the only lawyer in my family. I had no idea of what I was doing when I was going through law school and trying to figure out a job. Fortunately, I delayed my career, so I had plenty of friends ahead of me that could help me out and advise. And the way law firm and I'm saying law firm being big firms like I work at, like Kirkland, they hire their summer associate class after based on your first semester grades. When I was going through law school, it was really your first full year of grades that made kind of, you interviewed at the end of your first year. For me, with my evening program, the end of my second year, interviewed for those positions, got job offers for the next summer. So you went through your entire school year. You spent 10 to 12 weeks at a law firm, got an offer for after graduation, and then you returned after that. So your career was kind of set early on. It's bumped up even earlier. It's crazy. Now we're saying like this last year we had, I think, like 21 L's because we're finding, more success in terms of getting people in and successful by bringing them in earlier with the 1L program. So for me, when I went through during a recession. And so it was a really scary time. I remember when I was going through OCI, people were like, don't tell people you want to do only transactional. You may not get a job.
Really?
And it was one of those things where I was like, okay, I went to law school to be a transactional lawyer. Like, that's what I want to do. I was really fortunate and had a bunch of job opportunities. I had my pick, and what I wanted at the end of the day, it was my second career. And so I wanted to make sure. I felt probably more pressure than I should at that point, but I felt a lot of pressure to make the right choice.
Mm-hmm.
And what I decided was I wanted one of the bigger international law firms. And because just the opportunity basically for the type of practices, the repetitions, the big deals, they were all coming through the big firms. So I chose international law firms for that reason. I was also, like I said, a kid of the recession. So I looked at law firms that had kind of hedges.
Right.
I started at Jones Day, and it was what, honestly, why I also came to Kirkland. It had the hedge. It had the bankruptcy hedge that even when transactional markets were down and there wasn't deal flow, bankruptcies were up. So you were always learning. You were always doing. And it was just something different. You were doing healthy M&A or unhealthy M&A in bankruptcy. Right. And so for me, that was what was important going through. And what I always tell law students now is not that litigation isn't an apprenticeship, but transactional practice more than anything is a true apprenticeship. Like, I can't tell you how to turn a purchase agreement by letting you go through a class. Like, it's one of those things, it's a lot of training, it's deal after deal after deal. So the Dallas legal market looks completely different than it did when I went through OCI. So right now, for instance, like, my law firm does more deals than anybody else in the state of Texas. Mm-hmm. So as a young lawyer, it's like, you need to learn, and you only learn by doing. Go to a place that's going to get you all that repetition to be able to get you the shots at being able to do stuff quick, like sooner than later, because you do see so many things. Because that's the key.
What can you tell us about Kirkland for those who don't know, kind of high level about the firm, maybe some of the bigger specialty practices, and then specifically you and your group?
Sure. So Kirkland is one of the world's largest law firms. We've got offices all around the world in every major city across the globe. I sit in Dallas, which only actually opened up in 2018. So wow. We're still the new kid on the block for all intents and purposes. That to say, we're one of the largest firms in Dallas now already. We've had a lot of growth. Same thing in Houston. Andy Calder opened the Houston office with John Pitts. They opened it up 10 years ago. And I remember being at Jones Day and being like, how are they going to do that? Because it was very much a market of, especially Houston, of like Baker Botts and Viennese and the Texas firms. And they just took it by fire. And now Texas alone is like over 400 infrastructure lawyers. It's nuts.
Oh, and so that leads me kind of where we wanted to go next into your career personally. But what is it that K&E does so well to be kind of known as the prominent M&A PE firm? And then specifically as that relates to you, I'm sure that's what made you want to go there, right? You've kind of shown in your past that you want to play in the big leagues. You want all the pressure, all the opportunity. How are you sourcing your clients? Is it something that, like you say, an apprenticeship, you have worked with clients over the course of time, they've built up that trust? Or is it kind of that chicken and egg, you've got to win a couple, prove yourself a little bit, and then they come to you?
So, when I got the job offer from Kirkland, it was one of those things. It was scary in a lot of ways. I was a senior associate that was well on my way to partnership at the firm I was at. But it was one of those things that it felt like it was like making the big leagues. That it was one of those that I knew I could do it. I knew I could do the work. but I had to bet on myself. And it was intimidating because it was one of those things I like being challenged. I like growing. I like learning. And I knew at Kirkland I was probably never going to be the smartest person in the room. But that's amazing because that means that there's people that know so much more than me that I can call and ask the question. Not that I am not an exceptional lawyer in and of myself, but it's one of those things to be able to have those resources that you have truly some of the best and smartest minds in the country to be able to call and say, have you seen this? Have you thought about this? How do you get comfortable with this risk? What have you done in this situation? I saw this precedent that you did. How'd you get comfortable? What'd you advise? What'd you do? It was amazing to be able to learn from those people and be mentored by those people. It just felt like an opportunity to be able to do the biggest and the splashiest deals and be able to potentially lead those deals one day was something I felt like I needed to do. And it was one of those that Kirkland is a meritocracy, and you put in the work, you're going to be given the opportunity. And Andy Calder, who started Kirkland, Texas, I did the work, he invested in me, and the man's been like my biggest champion, my biggest supporter. And it's one of those things, like he and John Pitts, who's also one of my mentors, he always preaches you hunt in packs. You don't go at this alone. Like, we're better together. And we are. One of my biggest clients, Global Infrastructure Partners, we as a firm didn't really do work for them. And they partnered with KKR. We were representing KKR to do the take private of Cyrus One. And the general counsel and the business teams were really impressed by that deal. It was Calder, it was Pitts, and myself. And they were really impressed by the job that we did. And after the deal was done, they're like, we'd love for you to pitch the work. Looking back now, it's been 2.5 years, and we've done all of GIP's biggest, most transformative transaction, including the deal with BlackRock. So it's one of those things that, putting your best foot forward with every deal you do and treating each client and each deal as if they're the most important. For me, that's my strategy. And I think it's kind of paid off, and finding the right people to kind of team up and work with, that you really work well together and not feel like you always have to take the credit. It's okay. It's one of those things that, like, we share in the success of each other.
I want to break down a little bit more of like what goes on to that work product, right? Because I think a lot of us will read these headlines of these massive transactions and understand that the legal team played a big part in that. For anyone who's listening to this, there's an incredible article on Melissa that Kirkland put up about you managing and juggling 3 massive transactions at once. Can you, as much as you can, without getting too deep into, the specifics or, things that might go over our heads from the legal side, what all entails from the moment a KKR approaches you guys with a deal of massive size? Where does your mind go? What does that checklist look like of things that you have to do? And then is there that component of kind of a shot clock that you have to get these done by? Share that, one. I'm sure many of us don't know, but 2, also for those second and third year law students who are envisioning themselves in a career like this, what does it look like in your day to day, and how are you managing that?
Sure. So I will say, I think doing law school the way I did, I had to learn how to compartmentalize and juggle really well. Right. And it was one of those things, I had a routine, and I put things into chunks, because otherwise I would get overwhelmed by everything I needed to do for work, everything I needed to do for school. And I've taken that approach with, like, my job as a lawyer. As a transactional lawyer, you never know what each day is going to hold. But I think, to do your clients the best service you can, because what I said earlier, I mean, like, my business development is treating every client like they are the most important client and their deal is the most important deal. And to believe that and give them that service. And that requires being exceptionally organized, and 2, having a team around you. I could not have done those 3 deals together, and that's pretty consistent for me. I mean, it's one of those things where a lot of times I have multiple deals going on. Like right now, I've got 10 active matters that are trying to get done, is being able to have the right people. And, Kirkland is a meritocracy. So it's like, who is the best player on the field? All right, this person's going to go in and they're going to do this deal. Like that Cyrus One Take Private, Andy Calder asked me if I would do it because I spent a ton of time in the data center world. I've done any type of data center deal that could be done, any sort of transaction structure. So it's one of those, like, we take the same approach with every deal. You get the right team together, and people working as a team make deals happen. It makes it happen timely, but it only happens if you're organized.
Yeah.
So every night before I go to bed, I kind of make my list. What needs to be done tomorrow? Where do we need to kind of get things done? I spend a lot of time training and mentoring my young associates about like punch list and organization, because it sounds silly, but without that, things fall through the cracks. I have a process for, when they're doing diligence, when they need to flag different things for us, like really investing and mentoring lawyers when they're young so that they get a really good foundation. It makes my job easier. And so I spend a lot of time doing that. So you get those calls and you manage it. It's one of those things that people laugh at my color coded checklist, but I live and die by them, because it's one of those, like, you give me a fully white checklist, I'm like, what's been done and what hasn't? And I've got my little system down where it's like, I look at it and I'm like, all right, we are a week out from signing. There's too much yellow on here and there's not enough blue, which means it's an execution form, or green, meaning it's done. Like, how do I get it done? And I check in with my team regularly. I check in with the client to say, where are things at on your end? And so I think being able to manage process, it's stuff like that like I can kind of teach you, but some of that is also like an intangible that you're kind of wired one way or another, that I think will help you manage and get these really complicated deals done. Like, I remember on some of these transactions, because whenever you buy a company, you've got to get the equity in, you also have to get the debt in, you also have to go get regulatory approvals. And regulatory approvals may be around the world, debt may be around the world, and making sure everybody is coordinated and talking to each other,
Right.
and making sure that they are all working in perfect motion is actually quite important. It's as important to execute on that end as it is on the words on the paper. If I don't execute on that end, the words on the paper mean nothing.
Right. I can't even imagine all the moving pieces that you've got to hope everyone's right communicating on, tracking in time. And how, as we kind of wrap up here, how has your experience been with, I know your time at Dedman was great. How is the new crop of graduates, and are they as prepared as ever? And kind of parting advice for those new lawyers entering the workforce of what you would, if you were in their shoes now, knowing what you know.
I love hiring from SMU. I'm on the hiring committee for Texas, and I do think that SMU does an incredibly good job of preparing students to go to a firm like Kirkland with a transactional practice, which a lot of programs don't. Like Andy Van Noort in my office, he teaches a real estate seminar, and it's really teaching people how to draft waterfalls, which I wish I would have known that during law school. It's so much of every document that I do for a joint venture. But SMU, when I was there, had some of these classes, but the scope and range of them has only grown. And they've also kind of widened the net and said you can start taking some classes in the business school. So I was fortunate to have a business degree and a banking background, but what I've given people the advice that if they don't have a business background and they're considering it at all, what I do, take advantage of SMU allowing you to go to the business school and take a basic accounting class.
Right.
Because, I negotiate networking capital. I have to understand what those principles mean still. So I think that there's a lot of great, I think as wonderful as the school was when I was there, I think they've done a great job of continuing to grow and challenge their students. And as far as additional advice, I think it's one of those things that you have to have a little grace with yourself. It's going straight from law school to a big firm is hard because no matter what, you're learning on the job. Right. And you're going to come in and not know how to do just very basic stuff and learning so much that it's almost overwhelming when you get into a law firm going, I don't know how to do anything. And so don't be afraid to ask questions and go someplace that's going to provide you the ability to see a bunch, do a bunch, because the more you do, the more you learn.
Right. And finding that mentor or some support system, it sounds invaluable. And
yep.
Thank you so much for sharing this wisdom. I know your time is valuable, so you've given us a time to share your experience, your story. What can the SMU alumni base do to support you and kind of your career and your journey going forward?
I think it's one of those things that the SMU community in Dallas is really strong, and continuing to find ways to work with each other and mentor and grow the next generation of great lawyers and business people.
And if you happen to be an M&A deal pro, give Melissa a call. She'll do you right. That's the evidence has been proven. But thank you so much, Melissa, for taking time. Excited to watch your journey continue to unfold and your career success grow. So thank you, and we'll talk soon.
All right. Thank you.